This week on the show, Allan reports on his trip to BSD Taiwan. There are new versions of Lumina and GhostBSD available for you to check out. And we have a bunch of OpenBSD P2K17 hackathon reports for you to read, all in a big news episode this week on BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 221, BSD in Taiwan, recorded on the 22nd of November 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedict Reuschling.
And I'm Allan G.
And we have a big show prepared for you this week, so we should get right into the headlines for our episode this week, which is Allan's trip report from the BSD Taiwan conference. So
yes,
why don't you take
as promised last week, where we didn't have enough time to talk about all the different things that had happened while we were off globetrotting, we have now a report. So, BSD Taiwan and Taiwan in general were quite a bit of fun and an interesting experience. So, I arrived on Thursday night and took the high-speed train from the airport to Taipei Main Station, and then switched to the Red Line subway and went after the venue. The meeting rooms and so on at the venue were very nice. The dorms were what you expect for dorms, about on par with BSD can, but with better mattresses. Maybe it's just
better shower curtains, I have to ask.
They had like a shower door thing, so I would say yes. The shower curtain did not hang down. And importantly, you bring this up. The curtains overlap some, so there's no crack. The bigger problem at BSD can. So the shower curtain being not wide enough and too long is just a bit annoying in the shower. But the curtain on the window not being wide enough or dark enough is a serious problem.
Yeah.
In Taipei, they solved this. They had nice, dark, thick curtains, and they have an overlap, so there's no crack of light in the morning.
Excellent.
This was especially important on the Monday, where I got to sleep in until like 10 to try to catch up from all the conference undersleeping.
Yeah, it was a long flight and all.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was great. So I basically got there and went to bed because, I landed at like 6:30 or something like that. And so by the time I got off the plane, stood in line and did immigration. They wouldn't stamp Graf's passport. That was a little sad. All that fun stuff, and the train and the subway and everything. It was rather late, so I mostly just caught up on some email and went to bed.
So was it easy to navigate the subway?
Yes. The cards were very similar to Japan. I would even say that they might be slightly easier to navigate than Japan because the lines, they have names like in Japan, but they also just have a color. So there's the red line, which is an R, the blue line is BL, the brown line is BR, the orange line is O, etc. And every stop has a number and a name. So while it's relatively similar in Japan, the lines, they have so many that the colors don't always work out, whatever. And they have numbers on some of the charts, but the station doesn't always tell you what number it is. But so anyway, very similar system with the same kind of card to go through. It's similar style, turnstile thing. So super easy and inexpensive. It was nice.
Okay, good. For people
which came in handy on Friday. So the Friday was my tourist day and mostly my jet lag catch-up day. So I spent the day with a bunch of other Freebsd developers doing touristy things. So after we managed to meet up, and we had to wait a little bit for it to open, so we had some coffee. And then we went to Taipei 101, which is basically the Taiwan World Trade Center or whatever they want to call it. It's a 101-story building, which was the tallest building in the world from 2004 to 2010, when a taller building was built. And it also features the world's fastest elevator from 2004 to 2016.
Turbo lift?
So it accelerates rapidly and gets going to 60 kilometers per hour, or over 1,000 meters per second, and transports you from the 5th floor, where you get on it, to the 89th floor, where you get off, in 37 seconds.
That's impressive.
You know, some people say they feel that in their ears. I felt that in my eyeballs.
Your eyeballs?
Yes, the pressure change in my eyes. Yeah, that was interesting. Main reason we went there is, being a bunch of engineers, we wanted to see the tuned mass damper. So it's kind of set in the center of the 92nd down to the 87th floor. There's this huge metal sphere-like thing hanging by these 8 cables, suspended, and then stabilized by a bunch of hydraulic struts. And the point of this 660-ton pendulum is, when the wind pushes on the building and it sways, the pendulum slows it down and reduces the sway by about 40%, making it much more comfortable to be someone on the 90th floor when it's windy out.
Oh yeah, this is an issue.
Yeah.
These heights.
But also, it's important for the building because they have, typhoons and earthquakes, and you don't want the building to fall over. So they make the building more flexible so that it can withstand that type of thing. And then you also have the problem of, glass doesn't like to flex that much, and so on. So at some point you have to dampen it and slow it down. They also had some videos on display. When we were there, it was a nice sunny day, not windy, and there was no earthquakes. Thank you. So it was just sitting there, not doing anything entertaining. But they had some videos of the 2 most recent typhoons they had and an earthquake they had, showing what happened there.
The forces,
in those videos, it looks like this ball is bouncing all over the place. But actually, the ball is trying to stay still. The building is moving.
Yeah.
Just the camera is attached to the building, so the camera's moving, not sitting still. So the projection is a bit off, but
they should have a webcam or something.
Well, they have the security cam pointed at it, but it's mounted to the building.
Yeah.
And so when the building moves, it makes it look like the sphere is moving, when really the sphere is doing its best to not move. But yes, it was quite interesting. You can see some of those videos on YouTube if you look for the Taipei 101 and so on. But it's especially interesting because the building was built just 200 meters away from a major fault line. So, it's going to get earthquaked. And to that end, they have some of the pilings that hold the base of the building still are up to 80 meters long, being 30 meters into the bedrock.
Yeah, that's
1.5 meters across or whatever. Yeah, they're big. But it was very cool. We also went up to the outdoor observation deck and got to look out at the city from that. It was very nice.
How's the food?
Yes, I would say the best thing about Taipei was definitely the food. So first thing we did after our touristing was, it's lunchtime. It's time for noms. So we went back down the elevator. It goes down quite a bit slower than it goes up. Not terribly slow. No, you're still going down from I think we got on the 88th or 87th floor and went down to the 5th. Very quickly, just only about half as quickly as you go up. I guess that has to do with it takes a lot more energy to stop on the way down than it does on the way up.
Yeah.
Right? If you stop accelerating on the way up, you will slow down automatically. If you stop accelerating on the way down, you're still going to be accelerating.
Cool. Quite significant.
Anyway, so we went to just a little tiny shop in the back alley, and we purposely walked away from the main street and into some back alleys and found some nice little place. The dumplings were excellent. They cost 5.5 Taiwanese dollars per dumpling, which equates to 24 cents Canadian.
Okay, that's...
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the 4 of us, with tea and everything added on, the whole bill we had 50-something dumplings between the 4 of us for lunch, came to 314 Taiwanese dollars, which worked out to $3 and something Canadian each. It was very well priced. And they were very, very good dumplings.
Okay. Yeah, there's the discussion of about cheap food and also good food. And if it's combined in one, then, by all means.
Yeah, indeed. So then after walking around the city for a few more hours, we retired to a pub to escape the heat. Taiwan is kind of a tropical island. It was over 30 degrees Celsius and very high humidity. We went to a little craft beer pub or something and waited out the hot part of the afternoon.
You have to get used to this kind of environment.
Yep, and then came the best part of the day, dinner time. So then we continued our concerted effort to cause a nationwide shortage of dumplings by eating all of the dumplings. We also managed to add an extra person to our little group. We managed to tack on some of the people that arrived later on Friday. But to the important part, the actual talks of the conference. First, I would actually like to give a special thanks out to Scott Tsai, who is a Taiwanese user and took detailed notes from each of these talks. So after my short description of what the talk was about or whatever, I've included a link to a Google Doc that this user has created that actually has notes notes that they kept during the talks. So there's more detail than I can have, and hopefully they will have the videos out relatively soon. So that'll be great too. So Saturday started the conference. After breakfast, we had Arun Thomas, and he provided a background on what RISC-V is and where it came from and so on, and then a rundown of what's happening with the architecture, like some of the changes, but also where the different bits of hardware are in their development cycle and when you'll be able to get some of it. It was quite interesting. Then George Neville-Neal talked about dtrace and using it in a distributed system as an auditing tool to figure out who did what to whom and when, and some of the other changes to dtrace, including the OpenDtrace project, trying to do the same idea as the OpenZFS project and have a central repository and pull in the improvements made in each of the different downstream consumers of dtrace, and then redistribute those out to everybody again as well. Try to make sure everybody's dtrace is the best dtrace. And then Baptiste Dusson presented on Poudre Image, which is extending everybody's favorite package building tool to also build FreeBSD images. Where he's working at Gandhi, they want to be able to build VM images with their custom software stack added to it. And so he kind of extended that capability and made it more general. So you can build a custom image of FreeBSD, whether that's the stock one plus some default settings and packages, or a custom build of FreeBSD or whatever. And it supports multiple different output formats. So you can get, ISOs or disk images or VM images or whatever. And there was also some talk of how to do that with ZFS to possibly have, say, the ZFS send output as a file that you could just receive that, to start that image. Or even a disk image with a Z-pool already baked into it.
Very nice.
That meshed quite well with my talk, which is going to be the second day of the conference. So also, I talked to Baptiste a bunch about it, and we were over lunch, and we have I've started work on making a userland tool, kind of like the MK image we have, so that you'd be able to create a Z-pool image without having to be root.
Ah, nice. That's excellent. So how did he recover from EuroBSDCon, by the way?
He's all back to his normal self.
Okay.
Baptiste and I also spent the Monday after the conference together shopping in districts kind of like Akihabara in Japan, but in Taiwan, before we had to head out to the airport.
Ah, okay. That's good to hear that he's recovered from the conference and the whole organizing stuff.
Then Brooks Davis presented his work on an API design for a replacement for mmap. It started with a history of the address space management functionality in the BSD family of operating systems, going all the way back to the very beginning and walking through how that worked and how that's evolved, which gave me a better understanding of how mmap actually is, why it is the way it is. And then that overview of the features and how it evolved filled in some gaps and also showed why his newer proposal would be beneficial. Even the motivation for the work is actually to further extend that to provide what the Cherry platform needs for its fat pointers, or having different pointers that point to the same address space and so on, so that you can have different capabilities on them. But how it would be generally useful to everyone as well to have this newer, better API.
The talks were recorded, by the way? Or?
Yes, the talks were recorded with the slides and everything, and I don't know when the video's about, but I expect it to be relatively soon. So you don't have to depend only on these notes, but it lets you sink into it a little sooner if you're interested.
Yeah, it's a good way of getting into the topic.
Mm-hmm. The next talk was actually Johannes Dietrich, who gave an interesting presentation about using FreeBSD and GPU acceleration for high-performance computing and supercomputing. One of the slides showed how AMD 64 has taken over almost the entire market for the top 500 supercomputers. There's not that many Spark or Power-based supercomputers left in the top 500. And another slide that showed that Linux dominates that list. There were, I think, only 3 or 4 of the top 500 machines that were running not Linux. And they mostly equated to the Spark and Power-based machines. So we were like, "There's, if we can get one of those, that'll be really cool." Sadly, the next week after BSD Taiwan at the Supercomputing Conference in California, they announced that Linux has now achieved 100% saturation of the top 500 supercomputers. So I think that makes his talk even more important. So he detailed the available tools on FreeBSD for doing this type of thing, but also what ports are missing or what some of the problems are with the different ports, what changes we should make to the base system and compiler toolchain, like OpenMP and the default include paths, and generally what FreeBSD needs to do to become a player in the supercomputer OS market. Johannes's perspective is actually interesting because he's a computational chemist, not a computer scientist. So he's just using FreeBSD to try to do science, but has been involved in FreeBSD long enough that he's giving back and trying to make it easier for everyone, not just trying to do just his work.
Excellent.
But if you're interested in numerical libraries or GPU acceleration or getting any of that stuff going, you should join the Porsche team that's working on that type of stuff. It'd be very good to get that making so that more people can use FreeBSD as a supercomputer and type platform. And maybe we can break that Linux deadlock.
Yeah, there's tremendous opportunity to grow in that market.
Yes, we can achieve infinite growth by just getting one of the top 500 supercomputers to run FreeBSD. Then the final talk that day was Peter Griffin, who spoke about how graphics support came about in Beehive and provided a history of how the feature evolved over time and where it's going in the future. And he has notes there. And there was also just a quick overview of some of the other interesting things in Beehive.
Yeah, what's coming next?
Yep. And then afterwards, we traveled as a group to a large restaurant to have dinner. Dinner was very good. There was even Mongolian vodka provided by FreeBSD's Ganbold. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do evil things to your last name. Sagaku? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody knows Ganbold. Ganbold's awesome. He also brought some souvenirs that he gave out to people. And that was just the first day.
Yeah, 2-day conference. Second day.
Second day started with my talk. I gave a talk, ZFS Advanced Integration. Mostly talked about how boot environments work, the new libbe and the be command line tool that my GSOC student, Kyle Knettinger, started. And he and I have been working on it to finish it up. I also talked about how you could use that for laptop and development systems and, the advantages of boot environments and what used to be called Brian Drury style boot environments, but we now just call deep boot environments, where you could say have your user source and user object directory per boot environment, so that when you boot a certain boot environment, you get the source code that matches the kernel there, which is really helpful if it's, say, a development box and you have FreeBSD, 11.1, 11.0, 10.3, and 10.4 all installed on the same machine. It'd really help if your user source matched with the running kernel in that case, right? But I also talked about how boot environments can be used to replace NanoBSD for appliances, and the fact that pfSense and FreeNAS have already done that. But I also talked about the ZFS boot CFG tool, which basically provides your next boot functionality. So you can, say, temporarily boot a different boot environment to make sure it's going to work before you make it permanent or to try something or whatever. And I talked about some future extensions to that to make it even more useful for headless appliances, like a failed boot counter that once you reach, say, 3 failed boots, it's going to start a rescue environment instead of the regular operating system, so that there'll be something for an administrator to SSH into and try to fix it or whatever.
That would be useful.
And how all this would tie in with Baptiste's Poudre image, where you can do upgrades this way. The way we do this at Scale Engine is we build an image and we just ZFS send it to all of our machines, and then they use the ZFS boot CFG to boot onto it, and then they're upgraded. If something goes wrong, we can back it out of it, but it usually doesn't, and everything just works.
Yeah, and it's less of pain to do the actual upgrade and merging and all that.
Yeah, and I talked a bit about how we avoid that by just extracting the small bits of config that we need and making more extensive use of the include directory support we've been building into FreeBSD, so that changes to default files usually happen as separate fragments in a different directory, and you don't modify the default file. And I talked a little bit about how if we just had UCL, we'd have all this. We just, need more people to work on that.
If only,
Yeah. And then I provided a rundown of those things that happen at the ZFS Developer Summit, so that people would know what's coming up with ZFS. Then after that, Theodore Rat presented his mitigations and other real security features. He made his case for changing to a failed closed model for interoperability and so on, defaulting to, reversing the old adage of be liberal in what you accept and exact in what you send. If somebody sends you something invalid, you should reject it because that's how vulnerabilities happen and so on. He also, I think his main point was that while we talk a lot about computers being, self-healing and so on, they really aren't, right? The software is just if this, then that, if this, then that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so if we stop pretending that computers can actually fix themselves when something goes wrong and instead just make them restart or whatever, it seems like we might actually get further. Anyway, I recommend you check out the talk. It's a bit hard to summarize.
Yeah, there are notes there people can read.
Yep, there are notes, and then there will be videos shortly. Then Ruslan Bukin provided a talk about his work in porting FreeBSD to the RISC-V architecture and writing the device drivers for the first platform. He walked through the process step by step, which actually led to members of the audience suggesting they actually turn that into a developer's handbook article explaining how to bring up FreeBSD on a new platform. So if you're interested at all in porting FreeBSD to various devices, I highly recommend this talk. It walks through the bits of it quite interestingly. And it even talks like the timeline, how long each different step took for in that case, and so on. And then at the end, he actually showed off using some of the tools from RISC-V and so on to actually build a custom FreeBSD board. In this case, it was MIPS rather than RISC, but he actually used the software, designed a custom MIPS-based computer, sent the designs to China, and got sent back a little board with a small MIPS processor. I think it's got 2 megs of flash that holds FreeBSD and about 1.7 megs of that flash. And it's interesting that the circuit board even has like FreeBSD etched in it and so on. It looks very cool. Then Mariusz Zaborski presented his case studies on sandboxing the base system with Capsicum in FreeBSD. He discussed the challenges encountered with various things, like the fact that DH client wants to talk to syslog, but syslog's not necessarily running yet, and once you capsicamize it, you can't make that connection out after and make the retry and so on. So that's interesting there. And he talked how he solved that problem and the challenges of converting existing programs versus if the program had been designed with sandboxing in mind, it would have been maybe easier. But he also talked about recent advances in the debugging tools that are available while you are converting existing applications to make sure that things don't break. And then he discussed Casper, the way to provide services like DNS lookup and so on from inside the sandbox. And then talked about the features, how Casper will be extended, and what we can look forward to in the next year and after that.
Okay, we'll be looking out for that. It's always interesting to see new developments with Capsicum. And
then the final presentation of the day was Mark Johnson on memory management improvements in FreeBSD 12. This talk provided a very nice overview of the entire memory management system in FreeBSD, what some of the major components are and how they work together and so on. And then it was also talking about some of the actual improvements that have been made and how care has to be taken. Some of this is relatively old code, and you can write code that looks like it'll work very well, and then, whoops, I accidentally made a security vulnerability, or whoops, I accidentally made the system terribly slow at this one specific thing, and that's really bad. And just how hard it is to do the memory management stuff because everybody's workload is different. And while, this change will make the workload this one workload so much faster, it will break other workloads. Whereas if we can have optimizations that are better for everybody, those are obviously better, but we don't want any changes to be too negative to any one workload.
Yeah, so you keep the balance between, speed and the generality of the operating system.
Yep. And then the conference wrapped up with a work in progress session, including updates on attaching multiple Jelly devices at once, multiprocessor safe networking on NetBSD, package source, improvements in NetBSD in general, including their updates on ZFS and dtrace, BSD on Microsoft Azure cloud, a tool called Mothra, which is a SendPR replacement that works with Bugzilla. It was interesting. There's also a short one about BSD Miser, which is actually from the company, one of the sponsors, SkyMiser. It's a machine learning compiler optimizer. Looks very interesting. Way to make code run faster on BSD. There's somebody presented about a FreeBSD port of Hyperledger, which is kind of like a blockchain type distributed ledger and works on FreeBSD now. And then Christoph talked about that vimage is on by default in FreeBSD 12, and a bit about the new PF testing framework that he's been working on out of Google Summer of Code, and trying to get people to help write more tests. Now that vimage is on by default, we can use it to write tests, including for IPsec that Olivier Cochard-Lebet is working on, and other people.
This ties in nice with the whole network stack.
Yeah, so we had a bunch of quick work in progress sessions. That was good.
Oh, it seems like it was a great conference.
Yes, we had the nice group photo. Yeah, in all, it was a very good conference. It was well organized and well attended. I think they expected like 80 people, and were prepared for up to 100. I think 120 some odd people registered before they turned the registration system off to try to stop more people from coming. So there's, they talked a bit about, at the end of it, about how they might do it again. and whether it makes sense to do it again as a separate thing, or to start, say, switching off AsiaBSDCon, so that every second year it would be in Taiwan instead of in Japan.
Like with VBSDCon and MeetBSD?
Yeah, so either doing that or keeping it as a separate conference or whatever. But in order for it to continue to go forward at all, they need more organizers and volunteers. It's a lot of work for one person. And so if you're in Taiwan, they have regular meetups. I think there's a group on Facebook, or if you can't find it, email me and I'll get you in touch with the right people. But yes, if you're interested, they have regular meetups where you can get involved and go forward from that. And yes, we'd just like to thank the sponsors quickly. There was the FreeBSD Foundation, a major sponsor of the conference. GameSofa, which is a iOS and web game studio that runs their stuff on FreeBSD. So that was great. Oath, which is formerly Yahoo. Ubiquity Networks was a sponsor. IX Systems, Microsoft, Gabor, which is an e-commerce platform in Asia. Gandhi, BSD Research, and SkyMiser, who we mentioned, and the 5x Ruby, which is the company that did the video recordings. So hopefully they'll have those ready for us soon.
Yeah, thanks to those sponsors. And we look forward to another conference in whatever format or whatever time frame this might be. So great work by the BSD Taiwan organizers. I've been watching it a little bit on social media and was like, I should have gone, but impossible in the teaching. When I'm teaching, I can't be somewhere else, or hardly. All right, great report. Thank you, Allan. So our next story is about Lumina 1.4.0 being released. So for those people who don't know what Lumina is a desktop environment developed by the IX Systems folks, mostly Ken Moore and his team. And so the Lumina theme engine and associated configuration utility is a new component of the core desktop and provides enhanced theming capabilities for the desktop as well as all Qt5 applications. And while it started out live as a theming as a fork actually of the Qt5CT utility, it quickly grew all sorts of new features and functionalities such as system-defined color profiles, modular theme components, and built-in editors and creators for all components. And the backend of this engine is standardized theme plugin for the Qt5 toolkit, so that all Qt5 applications will now present a unified appearance. And if the application does not enforce a specific appearance theme on its own, then it will use this. And users of Lumina Desktop will automatically have this plugin enabled, so no special action is required. So you can get the new feel right away after installing it. So there's a note here. Please note that the older desktop theme system for Lumina has been rendered obsolete by the new engine, but a settings conversion path has already been implemented, which should transition your current settings to the new engine the first time you log into Lumina, and it does it all for you in the background, and you should idea of the new themes right after installing. Custom themes for the older system may not be converted though, but it is trivial to copy-paste, they write, and custom style sheets from the old system into the editor for the new theme engine to register and reapply them as desired. So there's also a Lumina themes repository. The author we have linked in the show notes here on the Lumina website. We have they want to give a shout out to the TrueOS Illumina themes GitHub repository contributors. All of the wallpapers in the 1.4.0 screenshots that are posted there come from that package, and they are working on making more wallpapers, color palettes, and desktop styles for use with the Lumina theme engine, so you can style your desktop the way you like it. And if your operating system does not currently provide a package for Lumina themes, they highly recommend that you make one as soon as possible, so people who are porting Lumina to other operating systems can get started with that soon.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they have these kind of compatibility things. So you can get a Windows-like interface, OS 10-like, XFCE-like, Mate-like, whatever kind of desktop you're coming from when you're switching to Lumina. You can get the buttons in the same place, which is a big deal for me.
So you feel right at home.
To it, I finally got used to using Lumina the way it was, and then I started using a Mac, and I was like, all the buttons are in the wrong place on this Mac. What's going on?
Yeah, this helps people migrating from one system to the next. It's a big thing if the desktop looks similar to the system they're migrating from.
Eventually, you might be able to convince them to use the better settings or whatever, but when you're first switching, making any bit you can make easier makes them fall in love with the system, and then they can adapt to not needing their kind of compatibility theme or whatever.
Yeah, the screenshots look actually quite nice and clean, so people can at least get a feel for what the new Lumina will look like. Yep. There's mention of a Lumina Pdf Viewer, and I guess you had something to do with that, Allan?
Yes, so the Lumina Pdf Viewer is at version 1.4 now. It's been kind of shipped in TrueOS for quite a while, and I used it to give presentations because, while it's also a very nice PDF viewer, it has great options for giving presentations, including I want to present on the second monitor on my system, and it doesn't necessarily full screen on the main screen, and so on. A bunch of very nice features for giving presentations, because I often export my slideshows as PDF because it's the most compatible way, and it's how they end up on the website or whatever anyway. And they'll play on any machine, sometimes. Depending on the conference, they'll send us your slides and we'll run it all off one laptop to avoid the connect-disconnect time between speakers and so on. So I very much liked it. But I had interesting problems with it every once in a while where, it pre-renders the next slide, so that's fine when you go ahead. But when you go back, it didn't keep the one or two slides backwards. So if you had to back up a slide because you accidentally pressed the button twice or something, there could be a 5-second delay to render the slide going backwards instead of forwards. Or, during the question period at the end of your presentation, somebody asks a question and you want to go back 10 slides and it's taking a very long time to do it. So when that happened to me at BSDCan this year, I might have savagely cornered Ken Moore and give him a laundry list of demands for his little PDF viewer program. I think by the end of BSDCan, he had a bunch of these prototyped, but now all of those features are complete and in this newest release. So Lumina Pdf Viewer will be a very nice presentation tool going forward.
Okay, excellent. And there are also important packaging changes. So one significant change of note for people who are packaging Lumina for their particular operating system is that the minimum supported versions of Qt for Lumina have been changed with this release. So there's Lumina-Core, which needs Qt 5.4 at least or higher. Lumina Media Player needs Qt 5.7 or higher, and everything else needs Qt 5.2 at least. And of course, using the latest version of the Qt5 libraries is always recommended because you get a bunch of bug fixes there and some improvements with Qt5 anyway. So when packaging for Linux distributions, the theme engine also requires the availability of some of the dev packages, so development packages for Qt, when compiling the theme plugin. And for additional information, specifically regarding Ubuntu builds, please take a look at the recent ticket on the Lumina repository. So there are some special instructions there. And mentioning the Lumina PDF utility, this requires the availability of the Poplar-Qt5 library. The includes for the library on Ubuntu 17.10 were found to be installed outside of the normal include directories. So a special rule for it was added for our OS detect file in the Lumina source tree. And if your particular operating system also places the Poplar include files in a non-standard place, then please patch the file or send the information to the Qt, to the Lumina folks.
Lots of other release notes here saying that there's now audio themes to control the login, logout, low battery sounds, etc. Options to replace Fluxbox as the default window manager and use something else if you prefer. They have themes redirect you to the theme engine configuration utility. The Start Lumina desktop auto-detects your active X11 displays and creates a new display for the Lumina session, preventing conflict with any existing graphic session you already have up. They have a process failure counter and restart mechanism that's useful for restarting Fluxbox from time to time, and so on. the Lumina Xconfig will restart Fluxbox after any monitor changes with, like, say, XR&R, and ensure that you get a reliable session, more 2D monitor layout mechanisms, ability to save and load monitor profiles. Super useful if you, say, want to save a profile on your laptop for presenting, where, things are in different places and condensed and maybe lower resolution so that everything's bigger and so on. Also distinguishing between the default monitor arrangement and the current monitor arrangement, allowing the user to set the current arrangement as the new default or not, as the case may be, and so on. Revamped the icon loading mechanism so it will auto-update when the theme changes, and they added special support for the /net path. So with the auto mounter in FreeBSD, that's automatically mounts NFS mounts from foreign hosts and so on. And when you access the directory, when their tool in Lumina was looking through that directory, it would pause for a long time while it waited for that to happen. And so now it doesn't auto try to index all of that and causing every one of those NFS mounts to go and be created, saving a bunch of desktop hangs and things of that nature.
Excellent, yeah. It's part of the user experience that you get from a responsive desktop.
And it's support for directories of wallpaper, so you can just change your wallpaper from time to time and so on. Remove pop-up dialogues prompting about system updates and replace them with the new restart with updates option. So just when you go to shut down, you have that option. Various other changes, lots of them. You can read the notes if you're that interested in it. But it looks very good. I guess the one thing they don't mention is if this is in the FreeBSD port tree yet. Can I get this outside of TrueOS yet? I think the answer is yes, but I don't know.
Could be. Yeah, what else is new?
No,
Lumina Open?
Yeah, there's lots more notes if you want to go read about it, but it's definitely worth checking out. I will try to find time this weekend to update my desktop machine to this if it's available for FreeBSD yet.
Yeah, give it a spin. And for people who want to look a little bit further, like their translations web portal or their bug tracker, they can find links at the bottom of the blog post for getting involved and like finding the IRC channel and getting some help there if that's needed. So yeah, seems like a fine release from the Lumina folks.
This week's episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and get started. You can spin up a FreeBSD machine in under 55 seconds, and they have lots of options. Especially of interest is the new droplet size they just added.
Oh, an even bigger one?
Yes. So we talked about the $5 one where you get 512 megs of memory, a virtual CPU, 20 gigs of disk, and a terabyte of transfer. And for $5, that's a really good deal. But half a gig of memory isn't very much.
Yeah, if you want to get serious, then a little bit more.
For $10, you can get double that, get 1 gig, and then for $20, you can get double that again and get 2 gigs. But now they've added a medium option. For $15 a month, you get 3 gigs of memory, which is quite a bit more than 512 megs or 1 gig, and you get the 1 VPCU input. But basically, it's the same as a $5 instance, but with 6 times as much RAM and 3 times as much transfer for only $15.
Mm-hmm. And if you sign up with DigitalOcean, you can use our coupon code called FreeBSD Now, and you can get $10. Is it 10?
Yes, you get a $10 credit into your account, so that will, pay for. If you sign up right now, it's not actually going to cost you $15 for the month of November because we're already good way of the way through November. So the $10 credit will cover the rest of this month of a $15 instance. And 3 gigs of RAM is a lot roomier than 1 gig or half a gig.
Mm. And the droplets, the VMs there will spin up within seconds. You just select where they should be running and the type of VM, of course, and then you can start using your droplet right away. It's super simple and quick.
Yeah, they have lots of locations to pick from. You can get, San Francisco, Toronto, New York, London, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Bangalore, or Singapore. And if your needs are different, 3 gigs of RAM, you're like, that's not a lot of RAM. Well, check out their high memory instances where you can get large amounts of memory. It's like, oh, you need 96 gigs? That'll be $1.43 an hour. Or there, 224 gigs, only $2.50 an hour.
Yeah.
Or it's like, well, I don't need a lot of memory. What I need is a lot of CPU. And it's like, well, you can get 8 dedicated CPUs for 23 cents an hour. Or, if 8, that's not a lot, well, how about 32 for 95 cents an hour? Whatever you need. They have the different sizes. And, it's not just virtual machines. They have their block storage where you can get up to 16 terabytes of storage per volume in individual gigabyte increments for 10 cents a gig a month. And you can run ZFS on that or something else. They have their object storage where you can get 250 gigs of storage and a terabyte of transfer for $5 a month. And if you try it, there's first 2 months are free. You can back up your VMs for 20% of the price, or you can create snapshots and just store the snapshot for only 5 cents per gigabyte per month. We do that for our system images we use on our DigitalOcean droplets. We have one perfect install of FreeBSD 11.1 exactly how we like it. We snapshot it. We pay I think it's 8 cents a month we pay for the 1 point something gigabyte snapshot. And when we need a bunch of DigitalOceans, we just bloop, bloop, bloop. And it's like, make me 10 VMs with that image of this size in these 2 data centers, and click. And 55 seconds later, that's all those FreeBSD machines up and running, ready to go. And they're doing work, and they're doing work, and the work is done, and delete them. And I paid for 3 hours of compute time.
Yeah, nothing more. And you get comprehensive monitoring and alerting, so you can they will collect metrics and monitor performance. You get a little dashboard. You can see how much bandwidth we're using or how much CPU is currently being used. So you get an overview of what's been happening in your droplets.
4 nines, uptime SLA, load balancer, cloud firewall, elastic IPs, floating IPs, whatever you need. Anyway, check it out. Coupon code is FreeBSD Now.
Yeah, to get you started with the first droplet.
So next up, we have a story from NetBSD. Their blog post is evocatively titled, "The Strongest KASLR Ever?" ? This is from Maxime Villard, who's been working on that. And he says, as I said in the previous episode, in October, they enabled the kernel ASLR for NetBSD on 64-bit x86 CPUs. The implementation would randomize the location of the kernel and virtual memory as one big block. A random virtual address would be chosen, and the kernel ELF section would be mapped contiguously sitting at that location. This design had several drawbacks. If one leak of that virtual address and one could successfully cache attack could be enough to construct the layout of the entire kernel and defeat the kernel address space layout randomization. So, improvement time. In the new design, each kernel ELF section is randomized independently. That is to say, the base address of each of the .text, .ro data, .data, and .bss are not correlated. The KSLR is already at this stage more difficult to detect, since you would need to leak or cache attack on each of those different sections in order to construct the in-memory kernel layout. Then, starting from there, several techniques are used to strengthen the implementation even more. The kernel ELF sections are themselves split into subblocks of approximately 1 megabyte. The kernel, therefore, goes from having, a text section, a read-only data section, the data section, and the BSS, to having .txt, .txt.0, .1, .2, .3, etc., .ro data, .0, .1, .2, etc., all the way up. As of today, this produces a kernel with about 33 sections, each of which is mapped at a random address and in a random order. This applies implies that you can have dozens of text segments. Therefore, even if you are able to conduct a cache attack and determine that a given range of memory is mapped as executable, you don't know which subblock of the text segment that it actually is. If you manage to obtain a kernel pointer via a leak, you can at most guess the address of the section that segment happens to find itself in, but you don't know the layout of the remaining 32 sections. In other words, defeating this KSLR implementation is much more complicated than in the initial design.
Okay.
So you can see each section is put in a 2 megabyte sized physical memory chunk. Given that the sections are 1 megabyte in size, this leaves half of the 2 megabytes unused. Once in control, the pre-kernel shifts the section within the chunk using a random offset aligned to the ELF alignment constraint, which is 64 bytes. This offset has a maximum value of 1 megabyte, so that once shifted, the section should reside inside that initial 2 megabyte chunk. So it goes from being aligned, text.3 goes from being at the beginning of a 2 megabyte chunk to randomly placed somewhere in the middle of that 2 megabyte chunk. The prekern then maps these 2 megabyte physical chunks at random virtual addresses, but addresses aligned to 2 megabytes. For example, the 2 sections in figure A will be mapped to 2 different virtual address spaces with a bunch of not mapped memory in between them. There's a reason this section are shifted in memory. It offers higher entropy. If we consider a text some random number section with a 64-byte ELF alignment constraint and give a look at the numbers. So the prekern shifts the 1 megabyte section in its 2 megabyte chunk with an offset aligned at 64 bytes. That means there are 2 to the 14 possible offsets it could be at. Then the prekern uses a 2 megabyte size, 2 megabyte aligned range of virtual address chosen in a 2 gigabyte window. So there are 2 to the power of 10 less 1 possible spots in the virtual address. Therefore, there are approximately 2 to the power of 24 possible locations for any section in the kernel. Whereas on Linux, the ASLR provides 2 to the power of 6. On macOS, it's 2 to the power of 8. And Windows is 2 to the power of 13, whereas NetBSD is 2 to the power of 24. So a lot more possible places for the kernel to be, meaning it's that much harder to map out the address space.
Guess where it is, yeah.
There's also some talk about larger pages. There's also a reason that they chose 2 megabyte aligned 2 megabyte size ranges for the virtual address. When the kernel is in control and initializes itself, it can now use large pages or super pages to map the physical 2 megabyte chunks, and which improves memory access performance because you don't have to have a bunch of individual 4K mappings. You just say this whole 2 megabyte thing is one thing. It also provides countermeasures against the TLB cache attacks. With the memory shift explained above, randomness is therefore enforced both at the physical and virtual levels. The address of the first page of a section does not equal the address of the section itself. It has, as a side effect, an interesting property. It can mostly mitigate the TLB cache attacks that they were talking about earlier. Each attack operating at the virtual page level, this allows you to know that a given large page is mapped as executable, but you don't know where that exactly is within the page the section actually begins. And then they talk a bit about the work in progress. Even if it is in a functional state, this implementation is still a work in progress. And some of the issues mentioned in the previous posts haven't been addressed yet. But feel free to test it and report any issues you encounter. Instructions on how to use this implementation can be found in the previous blog post and haven't changed. So we look forward to another update on this one coming up soon.
Yeah, it seems like they are working pretty hard on that and making sure that they have a very good and strong implementation. So it's time for our news roundup this week, starting with GhostBSD 11.1. It's finally ready and available. So they write, after a year of development, testing, debugging, and working on our software package, they are pleased to announce the release of GhostBSD 11.1. on 64-bit architecture with made and XFCE desktop on direct and torrent downloads. And with 11.1, they dropped the 32-bit i386 support and are currently maintaining their software package repository for more stability. So what's new, Allan, in GhostBSD?
Yeah, in addition to the GhostBSD software repository and their alternate package repo there's support for VMware Workstation Guest and all of its features. The installer has a new UFS full disk mirroring option, support for MBR and GPT, and a swap size option in the installer. Their new Whisker menu is the default application menu for XFCE, fitting with their whole cat meme. All software developed by GhostBSD is now getting a bunch of updates, and they have a new ZFS disk configuration option. They fixed the sound plugin for XFCE. They improved their ZFS installer. Bunch of that stuff. The partition list is not properly being updated when you use the back button, but they're working on that. And finally, they fixed a bug with their bug tracker. Got a lot of bugs in the bug tracker, right?
Kind of a meta thing.
Yep. And then they have instructions on how to install the ISO onto a USB stick to do the install. And yeah. They also have some screenshots they wanted to show us. So we'll get those brought up.
Yeah, people can find that at ghostbsd.org/download if they want to check that out. And yeah, seems like a release people should take a look at least.
One of the older different spins of FreeBSD.
Well, it's good that people are trying on different variations of the BSD-based operating system.
Yep.
Okay, our next story is a lot of reports have been coming in from the P2K17 Hackathon Report by OpenBSD. This was in Berlin, so we got a lot of articles and mentions on undeadly.org, so we're not going through all of them, of course, because it's a lot of text, but people should definitely check them out. So we have a report by Matthias Kilian on XPDF, Haskell, and more that he worked on. And there's one from, this one is it's called Herzliche Grüße vom Berlin, which is almost correct German. So this is from Mark SP. He was working on Mandoc, MISC packages, and the progress he made there. And
the first one here was from Matthias Kilian, who worked on XPDF and Haskell and a bunch of other stuff, but he says, Berlin is a strange place. Even if it's only 90 minutes east from where he lives now, it seems to be in a completely different time zone. So I entered the hacker room even later than previous port hackathons after he missed the first day completely, but still got quite a bit of work done.
Yeah, similarly from Mark SP, he writes, first time in Berlin. I've been to Germany lots of times, but never to Berlin. I'm actually old enough that my first German foray happened before 1989. It was interesting. Very white city with lots of spaces everywhere.
Yes, when I went to Berlin for the first time last year with you, it was a very nice place to visit.
It is, yeah.
Especially walking to the Tiergarten. It's like right in the middle of the city, but it's still super quiet and nice and nature-like and so on.
We went to the most touristy places, I think, but we haven't seen the whole city. But those are some good introductory places.
But I found the Tiergarten very relaxing and so on.
Oh, yeah. It's like the green lung of the city, like Central Park in New York. Paul Irofti has worked on hotplug-D, math ports, and XHCI, and some other kernel advancements in his report. There's Jeremy Evans on Ruby progress. There's some work on Postgres, and the WebDriver work has been done by him. And Christian Weisgerber has worked on random devices, because you can never have enough of them. And build failures and gettext were also worked on. Sebastian Reitenbach was working on Puppet. and Anthony J. Bentley on firmware, games, and securing package _at runs. So this got a little bit more security.
Yeah, he says here, back in April, Stefan Sperling asked if anyone was interested in using ASOS's free licensed sources to build firmware for the ATH and USB wireless cards. He says, I never saw any takers on the mailing list, so when coming up with ideas to work on at the hackathon, I decided to give that a shot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good thing to start.
So if you want to know how that went, check out that trip report.
Mm-hmm. Then there is Landry Broyle, something like that, on Mozilla things and much more, which is also worth checking out.
Yes,
there's
he
Florian.
notes that he realized that P2K17 would have been 10 years after P2K7, his first hackathon.
So he's been with the project that long?
Yeah. He says, I came to Berlin with lots of diffs already prepared, as the previous weekend we had held a pre-hackathon in a hidden place somewhere in the middle of France, involving lots of cheese and fun times, but also productive times. And as prodded by a mail from a Freebsd contributor, I had embarked on the ginormous task of paving the way of updating the Geo/QGIS to a new major version, which involves switching from Qt4 Python 2 to Qt5 Python 3.
Okay.
And then there's talk about doing the Firefox 57 update. So that's definitely interesting if you're into web browsers. And who isn't into web browsers, right?
Yeah. These days, everyone. The next one is from Florian Opser on network stack progress, kernel relinking, and more. So he has a report written about it's actually a long report about the work he's doing there with, some changes in some more known utilities and any improvements made there to make it more secure. And last report, is it the last one? Yeah, from Antoine Chacoteau of EuroBSDCon organization fame. And he has been working, of course, on ports and package progress. So there's more
Did you
stuff.
say fame or infamy?
I said fame. It was a good conference. I have no...
Teasing.
Yeah. He writes, nothing fancy, just ports work, but my first time in Berlin was a blast. It's been a while since he attended a ports hackathon where he ended up exclusively working on ports, and P2K17 was one of them. Yeah, ports is as good as anything you can work on as a hackathon, so definitely worth working on this. Yeah, so check out these reports, all of them as a whole, to get a feel of what the hackathon was like and how generally this is the OpenBSD way of getting a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time. And consider making a contribution to the OpenBSD Foundation maybe to sponsor future events like this.
Yes, I think I saw the headline. They are $30,000 short of their goal for 2017.
Oh, okay. Then we should make an effort to make their year-end.
Yeah, of course, as I would say, to them, the more important ones are the $5 or $10 a month from individual people, rather than necessarily a large lump sum donation. Mm-hmm. They've been getting the $10 a month out of me for quite a while. So,
okay. Speaking of sponsors, this week's episode is also sponsored by IX Systems. If you're looking for a server, then check out IX Systems because they provide you with a server buying guide for open source, which...
if you heard some banging outside, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago, that was actually another IX system being delivered to my house. So when I don't know if a couple weeks back we talked about, I bought this 4U disk shelf that holds, it's basically the entire chassis is disk. It has a little board in it that's the IPMI that controls the fans and the SAS expander. And it's basically an entire 4U chassis where you fill both ends with disks. It's like all disks in the front and all disks except for power supplies and SAS connectors at the back. and it holds 44 disks and 4U, nice and dense. We bought that to extend our backup server because it wasn't big enough to hold all the backups we have now. But then, partly while I was away, there was a big surge, but also just even this last weekend, there was the biggest live stream event we'd ever hosted. And it made a lot more recordings than we were expecting. And so suddenly we're running low on space. So we had to get another one. So we call up IX on Friday and be like, hey, we need more storage.
Soon.
I guess it was Thursday night. We called them Thursday night and we're like, we actually need another one of those. I'm like, okay. And we sign off on the order Friday morning. It ships Wednesday afternoon, it shipped on Monday afternoon and arrived here Wednesday. So we got our emergency storage expansion in, less than a week.
Oh, that's
and we're
impressive.
in a different country than they are.
Yeah,
and
that's
everything we need is included. So the drives ship in a separate box with like super duper padding, but the drives are already in the hot swap caddies. So I don't have to sit there and put the tiny screws in all these drives. I literally just take them out of the anti-static bag, plop them in the computer once it's in the rack, because it makes it a lot easier to lift the computer when there's not a bunch of hard drives in it. And then run the cable into the external SAS connector on the server, and I have more storage. I just zpool add, and suddenly I'm not out of space anymore.
For a while now, at least.
Yes, and we haven't filled all 44 drive slots yet, so we will be able to just keep adding drives as we run low on space, giving us the advantage of, if the next time we run low on space, the best price point for, dollars per gigabyte is 8 or 10 or 12 terabyte drives instead of the 6 terabyte drives we're using today. That means I'm not stuck using one size of hard drive.
Oh, excellent. And if you're watching this or during the Black Friday week, they have a special thing for you now. So they have a Black Friday savings. You can get 15% off their entire FreeNAS Mini XL order on their website if you use the promo code ZFS15, or you can save 10% off on Amazon without any code required, which gives you roughly $700 in savings. So this is something I pulled down from their iX Systems tweet.
Yeah, they also have their trip report from LISA, the Large Installation System Administrators Conference. I was there for one day of it. So the 35th LISA conference was held this year at the Hyatt Regency Embarcadero in San Francisco. Yes, that's the famous hotel from the Towering Inferno and the Mel Brooks classic High Anxiety. Anyway, iX Systems had two booths at this year's LISA Expo. David Valencia, Ruben Del Rosario, and Andrew Nguyen staffed the iX booth that featured an 8-bay FreeNAS Mini and a TrueNAS X10, while Drew Levine and Warren Black staffed the open source FreeBSD FreeNAS booth, where on the one day they were joined by Deb Goodkin and Ed Mass from the FreeBSD Foundation, and some guy named Allan Jude from the FreeBSD project.
Yeah, he keeps dropping into conferences and BSD events.
Oh, I definitely parachuted in that one. I was there for like a day, and that was it. Both booths were kept quite busy during the expo. They enjoyed catching up with many familiar faces, as well as first-time attendees. The LISA attracts system administrators from the world's like universities, telcos, governments, research labs, large companies, etc. The hot topic at the FreeBSD booth this year was definitely ZFS. We had a chance to share exciting new features from the OpenZFS Dev Summit with the recent press release on RAID Z expansion.
Which will be huge.
There's myself and Drew and Deb at the FreeBSD booth there.
That's a nice picture.
That must have been morning because there was still some swag left.
Yeah, people are taking stuff a lot from the table because they always have something interesting to get.
They were apparently also chatting with Mike Cavarella the tutorial co-chair and longtime documentation advocate via Mike in the Box, which was a little robot with an iPad for a face. They also got to meet people that worked at the Lego company on IT there, and longtime FreeBSD committer Garrett Wallman and alumni committer FLZ at also stopped by to catch up on FreeBSD and FreeNAS. Mm-hmm. And apparently, actually, Lisa next year will be held in Nashville, Tennessee, in the backyard of IX Systems South office in Marysville.
Ooh, interesting.
So I expect quite a showing there next year then.
Well, that's good to know, so people can mark their calendars. Yeah, so IX Systems sponsors a lot of conferences and open source spaces, and BSD specifically. So it's good to have them around, and they have experts. They've built multiple or like huge number of systems by now for their special purpose, special open source needs. So you just give them a call and you tell them what the intended purpose for the server is that you need, and they will build you a system that is tailored towards your needs, not some special thing they just came up with. So this is exactly the people you want to talk to for your needs in server space.
Yep. And speaking of IX and IX South especially, there's TrueOS. In particular, they have a series of talks coming up or have happened recently. So you should check that out. First, they were at the Tech and Open Source at Pellissippi State University. So Ken Moore of the TrueOS project presented a talk at the Pellissippi State today, entitled "It's a Unix-like System: An Introduction to TrueOS and Open Source." And Joshua Smith of the TrueOS project was also in attendance. They were happy to see good attendance with about 40 individuals for that size meetup. That was quite good. And then they talked about how TrueOS and how they're continuing to innovate along with the FreeBSD project. There were many good questions were raised about development, snapshots, cryptocurrency, and cybersecurity. We've included a copy of the slides if you'd like to look at the so on. And they have all that, and a reminder about the now past Knox Bug meetup on October 30th. But I imagine if we head over to the page there, their next one is already scheduled and not that far away.
It's becoming a regular thing, or is already.
Yes, November 28th, so that's next Tuesday. John Hickson will be at the Knox Bug talking about Samba for a mixed network of Windows and Mac. So
excellent.
If you're the storage administrator and responsible for dealing with all that, you should definitely check that out.
Yeah, connecting all these things together and making storage available for them. Yeah, so there are slides on SlideShare for people to look at. And people, there are also videos, I see.
Yes, so apparently they have videos from the Knox Bug meeting that you missed. But yes, it says, normally I take notes and provide a summary of our meeting. This time around, we have a video recording and published it. So you can see Ken's talk about the new Lumina 2.0 window manager that he presented at Ohio Linux Fest. And some of the other interesting things coming up with the desktop. So we've seen Lumina 1.4, but what's in store for Lumina 2.0?
Yeah, it will be exciting, and are excited, and certainly we'll be covering it in the show once it's out, but it's, they just released Lumina 1.4, and I guess they need some time for 2.0 to come out. But yeah, it's something to look out for. Our next story is the official OpenBSD 6.2 CD set, the only one to be made. So this is a special thing over at undeadleader.org. So Bob Beck writes there, so again, this release, the tradition of making Theo do art has continued. Up for sale by auction to the highest bidder on eBay is the only one OpenBSD 6.2 CD set to be produced. The case and CDs feature the 6.2 artwork, custom drawn and signed by Theo, and all proceeds go to support OpenBSD. And there's an auction link here provided at eBay. And of course, as with previous auctions from OpenBSD, if you do not have a successful bidder, they would like to encourage you to donate the equivalent of your highest bid to the project so that they also can benefit from that. And yeah, the artwork looks pretty nice, actually. So for people who really are into collecting CD sets, and this is a special one because it's the only one in existence, people want to bid on that one. The current bid is at 1,425 Canadian dollars. Is that Canadian dollars? Yeah.
Yes, because OpenBSD is based in Canada.
Mm. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, check it out.
Yeah. Interesting art.
Yeah, but collectors are... Yeah, you're the only person who has that, so you can
Indeed.
brag, tell people that you're the only person in existence that has that. And we're getting right into our Beastie Bits now, with the first item being Hammer 2 user space on Linux. So remember last episode we talked about Hammer 2 when we covered the new release of Dragonfly, and apparently there's now a user space implementation for Linux.
Not a complete implementation. It's mostly just some of the tools being ported over. So the user who did this for the Hammer 1 tools has updated the repo to also have the Hammer 2 tools. So this gives you newfs_hammer 2, which allows you to create an image file on Linux that you could then mount on Dragonfly. So handy if you want to, say, build a Dragonfly image on a non-Dragonfly computer and then boot it, like for a VM or something. To say, the file system itself doesn't exist on Linux, thus the majority of commands that require hammer ioctls are actually not usable. So you can use newfs hammer and hammer block map, check map, show undo, strip, recover, etc. are usable, but you can't actually mount the file system or anything like that on Linux.
Okay.
But it makes it possible to inspect the image and do basic operations on it, which seems like a good thing.
Yeah, to see whether a file is there or the structure is intact or something.
Yep.
Okay. Next item is there's an OpenBSD porting workshop. Has now been changed to January 3rd, 2018, over at Nicebug. And so the idea is there. Writing ports is a crucial aspect of BSD development, and there's a lot of software out in the world, and ports and packages make all our lives much easier. And all the non-base software you use pass through the fingers of a porter. Making your own ports is an easy and fun way to make your first contribution to a BSD project. Is there some piece of software that you can't live without? Do you have some software of your own that you would like to have readily available to BSD users? Just interested in learning about ports and package development? This is a workshop for you. No experience necessary to participate, all set up, including an OpenBSD virtual machine, will be available to participants. This is Brian Callahan doing this?
Yep. Brian Callahan will be running that. And yes, it's will be at the LMHQ, 150 Broadway on the 20th floor in Manhattan.
Yeah, so if people have time after the new year to get right into OpenBSD development and porting, this is a good opportunity to check that out. Next up is a question that we've been hearing hearing asked a lot. Matt Ahrens answers the question when native encryption for ZFS will land. So, Allan, when will that be?
Yeah, so originally there was the tweet from the OpenZFS project saying the RAID Z expansion, the most requested ZFS feature ever, is coming courtesy of the Freebsd Foundation with a sneak preview at the Dev Summit. And a user's reply was, very cool, but I'm looking for encryption first. And Matt Ahrens' reply was, don't worry, you'll definitely have encryption before RAID Z expansion. Smiley face. It's already in the ZFS on Linux master branch. It's just not released yet. It's just there's a bunch of work to integrate it into FreeBSD, and it's not done yet. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, people are excited.
I don't have a timeline for you. Maybe early next year. But we don't expect a prototype of the RAID Z expansion stuff until BSD can, which would be in the summer. So
this is just started yet, so just need to wait a little bit longer. Okay, the next one is the first successful build of OpenBSD base system over at Nanxiao's blog.
This would be their first successful one rather than the first one ever. But yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking OpenBSD has been around for a while.
Yeah. So although the documentation of building OpenBSD-based systems is very simple, we've done it live on the air in one of the very early episodes of BSD Now. It still cost me nearly half a week to complete this project. I share the experiences here. Say the most important thing is their user obj folder must be clean, belong to the wobj user, and have the right mode. Otherwise, you get confronted with the annoying permission denied issues that I recorded in another blog post. And then he walks through some of the various other interesting and fun things he had.
Some errors encountered at first.
And then he also is like, why do these files start with a question mark? And so he digs into that a bit more.
Well, okay. So people who haven't done that before, they can use that as a starting point.
Yep. It's definitely always interesting to see experiences from new users like this. And I'm very grateful to this person for blogging about it. I know some people wouldn't want to do that, but even on Twitter the other day, somebody showed a picture of they have the like FreeBSD notebook where they've kept this little diary kind of the things they've done and trying to keep track of their ideas. And I'm, perpetually grateful to Dan Langill for doing the FreeBSD diary website where he kept his notes on problems he had and how he solved them and so on, because it helped me a lot back when I was getting started. And I think if we just had a couple more people doing that for FreeBSD, it would help even more new people.
Yeah, because we didn't wake up one day and knowing everything about BSD. We all had to learn, sometimes the hard way, to find the information we need to fix this one thing that was in our way. And making it easier for other users is definitely helping you as well, because there's some information sharing back and forth. All right, our next item is the Knoxbot November meeting. We have a link here to...
Apparently I kind of spoiled this one earlier, but yes. Tuesday, November 28th, John Hickson will be giving the talk, Setting Up Samba for a Mixed Network of Windows and Mac. It will be from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the IX Systems Tennessee office, which is 108 West Church Avenue in Marysville. So not at the library this time.
Okay, so they let the people in the office or the meeting room there at least.
Mm-hmm. But yes, now that John has moved out to Tennessee, he's available for Knoxplug. So you should definitely go check that out. I would if I was there.
Yeah, but if you're in the area and want to meet people, then this is definitely a good opportunity.
Yes, and Drew will be there and a bunch of other people from TrueOS, so definitely great people. I owe a big debt to John Hickson. He was actually one of the people. So my first conference was BSD Can, and I went there and I met like 2 people and was very shy. The next conference was EuroBSDCon in Poland, and that was my first time giving a talk and so on. And one of the people I happened to meet there was John Hickson, and I hung out with him a bit, and he was fun. And he convinced me to come to Meet BSD, even though that was only like 10 days after I got home. I'd have to get back on a plane and fly off to California or whatever. But I did it, and I went to my first Meet BSD in 2012, and that conference made a big difference for me. It was the unconference style, so there was a lot more talking to people and stuff, and not just sitting through a bunch of lectures. David Maxwell did a very good talk there, and I met Sean Bruno and a bunch of other people, and it was a big influence on me.
Yeah, you get an introduction to the wider BSD audience and more direct contact.
It was partly that I got forced to talk to more people by the format.
Some people need a little bit pushing in the right direction.
The speed geeking, I think in particular, is like we got broken into groups of like 4 or 5 people. And then we each went and sat in this very small group with an individual speaker, and they gave us like a 5 or 10 minute talk. So very short, rapid-fire talk, but allowed us to ask questions and be with different groups of people as you switched stations. And I imagine it was also interesting as a speaker, because I eventually went and I gave one of these, where I was one of the people hosting varying groups of people. Even as a speaker, it really changes the way you give the talk when you're giving it for the fourth time in the same hour.
Right. Yeah, because then you get used to talking about the topic, and
you make certain parts more concise, and you expand on parts where people have had questions in the past, and so on. It kind of reminds me of when I was teaching the same class 2 different days of the week to different groups of students. The second one would always be slightly better. Well, having done the lightning talk 5 times, the 6th time is much better.
Yeah, this is good practice.
But I think there might also be a limit. I imagine by the 10th time it starts to get worse.
Yeah, it's true. At one point you just, haven't you listened to this already?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good to get this kind of thing.
Yes.
So, and our last item is Absolute FreeBSD 3rd edition pre-orders now available. So for someone who has pretty much read all of the chapters when it was still being developed by Michael Lucas, I can tell you that Absolute FreeBSD 3rd edition is definitely a book that you want to get because it has a lot of good updated content, some new content in there as well. And
quite a bit new, I would imagine.
Yeah. And it's great. I basically just, great, I know now how to do this properly, and I know it before some other people know it because I did the typo checks and all this, and I have a little bit of a head start, but the stuff that I read from Michael is definitely worth buying the book. So apparently pre-orders are now available and in various places. So the website that we listed in the show notes has a little bit an overview of what it's all about and some chapter description, what the content is. And how
to buy it for your Kobo, Amazon US, UK, Germany, France, Canada, Italy, and Spain. Also, if you want, you can get the print and ebook combo direct from the publisher, No Starch Press. If you use the coupon code ILOVEMICHAEL, spelled L-U-V, you will get 30% off.
Yeah, so highly recommend this book if you want to get the latest and greatest about what BSD for FreeBSD is and how to use it in a production environment.
So
or even for
it covers how to install FreeBSD, but not just install it, but install it in, there's many options in the installer and how to decide which one's the right one for you, which file system to use in your different environments, how to back up and restore critical data, when and how to tweak the kernel and when not to, network configuration from activating individual interfaces to actually selecting congestion control algorithms and advanced tuning, managing both UFS and ZFS, as well as ZFS's other important file systems like TempFS and so on, FreeBSD's software packaging, including building your own package repo, which is where I work, how and when to upgrade, how to build your own version of FreeBSD, advanced security features like BlacklistD and firewalls, monitoring and adjusting performance, container-like virtualization with jails, how to build a diskless system, how to deal with panics and crashes and bug reports, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess Michael Lucas will have a bunch of them at next year's BSDK, but it's so long off, you want to start reading right away. So
plus, it's big and heavy, so you won't be able to bring that many, and you're not going to want to have to haul this around with your luggage. So I recommend you buy it. And it's hard to argue with 30% off and getting the print and ebook versions.
All in one.
Sometimes you're going to want the book offline because you want to have it beside you or whatever. And sometimes you're going to want the ebook because it's easier to search.
For that one specific command you need to know. Yeah, so definitely check out the book. And thank you, Michael, for writing that. And he's already starting on new book projects. We'll cover this in future episodes. But yeah, he's been keeping busy.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into our feedback and questions section, we should mention our sponsor for that part, which is Tarsnap, of course. Imagine you just bought the latest and greatest books from your favorite author, and then you're like, well, I should probably have a way to safely store them somewhere for backup purposes. And this is exactly what Tarsnap provides. So they have online backups for the truly paranoid. Because, well, if you store this somewhere...
Because you don't want people to know that you paid for Taken by Systemd. Your privacy is important.
That's true.
You don't want to know what government lists you end up on if you back up your copy of Savage by Systemd to the public cloud. You want to do it encrypted.
Yeah. And the way to do this is you encrypt this locally with the Tarsnap software, if you know how to use it.
So the Tarsnap software will segment your data, deduplicate it, compress it, and then encrypt it. All on your machine, then send it to the cloud. That way, the cloud provider, the ISP, the government, and anybody in between can't have access to it. And there's nothing Tarsnap, the company, or even the people behind it, can be forced to do to give up that data. The data is encrypted on your machine by source code you can view and audit, and it makes sure that this doesn't happen.
And there's no excuse for people who say, well, it's not available on my operating system. They have clients for most of the Linux distribution, the most common ones, the BSDs, Mac OS X, and also Windows subsystem for Linux. So there should be a client for almost or pretty much everyone out there to use Tarsnap. And it's easy to get started. There's documentation available for it. And
it's all paid as you go. So there's no surprise charges, right? You put money in, you back up, and you get a statement. It's like, oh, I've used up the money. Time to put in more. I put in $20 like 2 years ago, and I haven't used it up yet.
Yeah, so it's easy to get started and then have the good sleep of knowing that Tarsnap will back up your stuff and you can retrieve it with the backup keys, and you're the only person who can do that.
Yep.
All right, our feedback and question section. We're getting stuff, but people should still supply us with more questions to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future episode and try to answer your questions. So the first one this week is from John about jails and networking. So he writes, he has worked a little bit with jails, but multiple times now he has run into issues with the networking. Sometimes the jail will boot up, but the IP address will not be assigned to an interface. Then when he attempts to add an IP address to the interface, he gets errors saying that he's not permitted.
First, there are two types of jails. In the default type, the regular type, the IP address has to be assigned to an interface on the host by root on the host, and then that IP address is allowed to be used by that jail, and you can't modify the interface in any way inside the jail. So yes, trying to assign the IP address while inside the jail will get the not permitted error. Or there's vimage. With vimage, you actually just get what's called an E pair or an Ethernet pair, and it's kind of a tunnel-like interface. One end of the pipe is inside the jail, and you can configure the IP address however you want, and then the other end is on the host and has to be hooked up to the network somehow, like a bridge or something.
Or you provided an alias.
So we'd need more output of what command you're trying to do that might be causing your problem there.
Yeah, he also writes, I had one jail working with networking, and I had allow.raw_sockets enabled. But after he rebooted his machine and restarted the jail, the networking no longer worked. Maybe you didn't set that in sysctl.conf and just did it on the command line.
That one is a per jail setting. So it'd be in your jail configuration file. It also depends what jail framework you're using. And also, again, how are you configuring the networking? If you're using a jail configuration file, instead of just the IP address, if you put the interface name, like IGP0 pipe the IP address, in the configuration, it will automatically add the IP as an alias when the jail starts up. If you're doing traditional jails, not vimage jails. Whereas if you have just the IP address and you don't have that configured in rc.conf to be added on the host, then yes, you've told the jail you're only allowed to use this IP address, and currently it doesn't exist, so you have no networking. So it sounds like either the IP address you're giving the jail is not configured on the host or isn't configured to be automatically added to the host.
Yeah, after reboots or some other thing.
So the general principle of how networking in jails works, the default way, is the jail's given access to one or more IP addresses that you manually specify that have to already exist on the host. Or if you do the interface pipe address method, it will be added to the host when the jail starts. So the default way was you're giving some subset of the available IP addresses on the host to a jail, and they're only allowed to use that. Whereas with vimage, they have their own instance of the network stack and control it themselves. So in general, to have networking work in the jail, in your jail.conf, you just have IP address, and it has interface pipe IP address, and it will bind that IP address when the jail starts and unbind it when it stops. Or you bind it manually in your rc.conf like you would if you were having a second IP address on the host, with ifconfig _ idp0 _ alias or whatever, and then your jail.conf specifies that IP address. But again, if you're telling a jail you can only use this IP address, but then not binding that IP address to the host, it's not going to work because that IP address isn't going to exist.
Yeah, and if you and if people who are listening were saying, well, I was just assigned this one IP address to the host, how can I get more IP addresses? Then use some of the private networks that are never routed to the internet and do some NAT or bridge.
Or something, yes. That's very common. But to be able to answer your questions better, we'd have to know, what command you were trying and what the error was, and also which jail management system you're using. Like, are you using just the jail.conf on FreeBSD, or are you using EasyJail or IOCage or one of many other options that could help us figure out where you're going wrong?
Yep. But at least we gave you some pointers. Maybe this helps you already, and if not, then send us a follow-up and we'll cover it.
Yes.
Next thing is something similar, but this is about virtual machines with bhyve and bhyve provisioning from Nathan. He writes, "Hello, Al. I've been working on finding a nice way to provision FreeBSD bhyve guests and bootstrap them into my Ansible environment with minimal intervention. The step I haven't found a good solution for is assignment of host names that match the guest names on the hypervisor. In KVM QEMU, with Linux guests, it is possible to set the serial number of the guest's virtual motherboard at the time of creation and use something like DMI decode in the auto install to set the correct host name. Thus, the VM is registered in DDNS on first boot. In bhyve, this is my understanding that only the guest UUID on or Mac, media access control, can be manually set, and the board serial is always bhyve. The problem with the UUID and Mac OS and Mac, of course, is that they have to be formatted correctly, so there is not much room for freedom. Currently, my workaround is to have the auto install set the host name as the MAC address, and after I first boot, I've run a bootstrap guest shell script that SSHs into the hypervisor, grabs the MAC of the specified guest, SSHs into the guest using the MAC, sets the correct host name, installs the Ansible dependencies, and so on, and then reboots. This is an okay workaround from my own gear, but I would not be a great solution for a system of any kind of scale. Besides, it would be great to get provisioning down from 3 to only 2 commands, like vm create and install, Ansible playbook, and then do the rest.
I've played a little bit with the bhyve load command. There's, I think it's -E to provide environment variables to the loader, and those end up showing up in kenv in the host. And then you could make up your own variables and extract them that way. I was looking at doing this for making a bhyve that would boot and then run a series of commands automatically and then shut down. So there would be basically a series of variables that would have the commands, and then maybe an extra variable that would provide a checksum to prove that it wasn't malicious or whatever. I don't know how that works if you're using the EFI way of booting, which I generally recommend because it's all one command instead of 2 separate commands, and that works in most orchestration systems a lot nicer.
And more.
He says a slightly more complex but elegant solution that the author of the email says is to run a small database with an API somewhere in the environment and post and get the necessary key value pairs at the time of VM creation and installation. This is how a lot of things like Amazon and so on work. When the machine boots up, it calls an API, and then based on the MAC address or something, you find the values in the database. I was looking at building something like that to make the cloud init style stuff work for Beehive. I didn't get all that far with that one.
Yeah, so he's been writing us to see if we or anyone else out there have any ideas for the most elegant way of simply passing a string to a Beehive guest from the host, or perhaps someone who knows who I could get in contact with to learn how to implement this functionality in Beehive source itself, given, of course, that I didn't miss something in the man pages.
I guess in general, a command line option to specify the motherboard serial number or whatever and change it from Beehive wouldn't be that hard to find in the source code. Although, I guess if that's what KVM, QEMU are doing on a regular basis, then I guess it's not as weird of a thing to do as I've immediately thought that's a very strange thing to do. I don't know if I have any other bright ideas, really.
It's certainly something, the more Beehive gets adoption and used, it would certainly be a good thing to have and think about to make this easy for people to provision those Beehives. Maybe Michael Dexter has an idea. We can ping him offline and maybe he has.
Yeah, it's just the thing I don't necessarily like about using the motherboard serial thing like that is it only really works for the host name. And, I'd like something that's slightly more flexible where I can provide, a list of key value pairs or whatever.
My own list.
Obviously, one that I'd seen before is, having an extra disk attached to the VM that has, it's small and has a file system with like a text file or whatever, but Beehive doesn't really support removing that disk without having to reboot afterwards or whatever, so it's not a great orchestration system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, maybe
I'll have to see what people come up with. There's lots of different clever things, but I wonder if there's any elegant ones.
Yeah, so let us know if you have something, and then we'll pass it along.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is from Lian, and it's very long. It's about OpenSSL jumping the shark, and it's a forwarded message from Ingo Schwarzer. So it's a long thing with a couple of quotes.
Yeah, so this email thread is about OpenSSH support for OpenSSL version 1.1. So in OpenSSL 1.1, they've changed the API to try to overcome a lot of these older the limitations of the API and some of the things that cause problems like Heartbleed and so on. And so they're trying to come up with a newer API, but it means every application that uses OpenSSL has to switch and or maintain versions that support both. And it's not a fun transition, but ideally we'll be better off in the end.
Yeah, and he provides a way to how to achieve that, or some how there might be a migration path for it. Let's see.
So they say in the quoted part of the message, it says, important API changes between major versions is something to be expected. Sometimes the changes are limited and sometimes they aren't. The structure of the changes themselves is the reason why the OpenSSL folks could not provide any migration path. The existence of this path would have negated the changes themselves. Right? The point of the change is that the old API just can't express things that we need to be able to do, and so hence new API. They say true, but only Ingo is saying true, but only in the 1.0 release series, while still attaining the goal of making the transition manageable for application projects. When you implement a major redesign, you can never expect to reap the benefits in the old stable branch. The way OpenSSL did, it doesn't achieve that either.
Okay.
So some talk about LibreSSL, and they say for the short term, it is the same order of quality as using the officially maintained OpenSSL 1.0 branch, and maybe even a bit better because we have fewer bugs. Of course, neither gets the benefit of opaque structures, but both allow working around the transition problem of going to 1.1. In the long term, LibreSSL will hopefully transition to opaque structures as well, only less rushed and with a better transition plan, at which point your argument will become moot.
Yep. And he provides basically a transition plan for a large-scale change that's compatible both ways in a widely used library. So the first thing is, say, we have a fictitious version of 41.0. The second thing would be to add a new interface in version 41.1, which is a minor bump only. Then you invite some application projects to switch to the new interfaces. Then you help with them to do the switch and learn from the experience. And quite probably you will have to publish bug fix releases 41.1.1 and 41.1.2 to improve what you did in steps 2 and 4. The sixth step would be to invite all users to switch. The seventh is once many of your users have switched, announce future deprecation. Then wait some time and then announce end of life for a specific date. And the last step would be to remove the old interfaces in version 42.0, which is a major bump then. So OpenSSL there, he writes, jump the shark and skipped steps 3 to 9, doing the first step and 10 in one single leap. So they cut it short a little bit.
Yeah, so the problem with the way OpenSSL did it is it means a program either supports the old way or the new way. And there's not really a way to do both that's clean and actually nice. Whereas if in, say, OpenSSL 1.1, they supported the old and the new in the library at the same time, it means that applications wouldn't have to all make the switch before, like, Ubuntu can't upgrade to 1.1 until every application a user might want to run supports 1.1.
That might never happen.
Whereas if the library supported both and they just announced, we're going to remove the old one in 1.4 or something, or 2.0, then that would have made a much smoother transition. But we'll have to see what happens here.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of it's a part of a software maintenance and deprecating features and bringing in new ones by, making it compatible enough for other people to migrate.
The original poster says that distributions are starting to phase out OpenSSL 1.0.2 and integrating 1.1 while keeping the version 102 in the long-term support distributions. So for a period of time, projects will have to maintain compatibility with both, whether they want to or not. And Ingo's comment is the OpenSSH project simply doesn't have the manpower to maintain compatibility with both at the same time. And even if it had, doing so would compromise the central project goal of security through simplicity and diligence. And so they will only support the OpenSSL 1.0 or LibreSSL for OpenSSH.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a manpower problem. Unfortunately, I have to say, but at one point you have to figure out which is the one you need to use and run with that.
And in particular, they're saying even if a distro wanted to maintain its own patch set to bring OpenSSH up to 1.1 of OpenSSL, it says, even for those distributions who can afford the required manpower, I consider attempting to maintain a 3,000 plus line vendor patch risky and maintaining a non-official compat layer also risky. Quite respectable vendors have screwed up with 3-line patches in the past. How can anyone feel confident about a 3,000 line vendor patch? How sure can you feel that none of those 3,000 lines cause non-obvious problems? That also answers the question about why they feel uncomfortable using such distributions.
Yep. That's a good description by Ingo. The problems involved. Yeah, so nice that you pointed us to this one, Leon, and many people can see what the problems there are in maintaining such a library. Okay, and our last question for this week, or feedback actually, are suggestions by Kim. He writes, "Hi guys, first I'd like to thank you for the great show. Secondly, I think the show can be improved a little bit. You guys mostly just sit and read from various postings on various websites, which is a bit annoying. Rather than reading the entire post, I think most of us would prefer a synopsis and then some personal comments from you guys. We can go read this stuff ourselves from the links you provide. Also, I think that what would be much more entertaining and valuable is actual demonstrations of various things to do on the various BSD flavors. More tutorials, more let's play with the system, tips and tricks and that sort of thing, like visual demonstrations of various things. Besides from the above, fantastic show, kind regards.
Yes, I've been, scolding Benedict about just reading everything, although, I've been doing a bit of it too. Part of it is just the amount of stuff and the fact that oftentimes the news article is not something in my expertise, and so it's harder for me to figure out which parts are the interesting parts to various people. But we try. It's also a time thing. There's only so much time for us to produce the show, and not that much time necessarily to read and understand the entire background behind, say, the kernel address space layout randomization stuff in order to try to summarize it. But we'll work on that. For the demonstration stuff, the main reason we stopped doing that again was time. The amount of time it takes to actually write up and script the tutorial is already prohibitive, and then trying to actually make a good recording of it usually requires multiple takes, and then you're talking 8 or 12 hours of pre-production stuff to try to make this half-hour segment or 20-minute segment of the show, and just we don't have the time for that. If somebody would like to produce these and send them in to us, and we will feature them in the show, that'd be great. Yeah. But
that's why we cover a couple of how-tos and tutorials on other websites as well.
As much as we can, because doing our own is just too time prohibitive, especially when people want them every single week. It's hard enough to keep up with the cadence of the show as it is. Especially, you might have noticed the last couple of this week and last week were fine, but before that, trying to do enough episodes ahead of time to be 3 weeks ahead to cover back-to-back-to-back travel, that was very taxing.
Yeah, it's
just on us personally. It's just the amount of time it took and so on, but also even just it. We pretty much tapped out our entire archive of stories and things we could cover.
Well, yeah, keeping it short or a little bit shorter than currently to get people still interested in the article or the posting.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next to keep the show small enough but still interesting, covering various BSD topics for many people.
If you want to help by creating the summary notes for articles, then we're more than willing to accept any help that we can get.
Mm-hmm. And some people are more to, the sysadmin types of postings. Some other people are more like the kernel stuff or what various BSDs are doing. We try to cater to most of these people, but it's different or difficult to find the middle ground for everyone. So we try to...
if we only talked about things that I had strong opinions on, then the show would all be on the same 3 topics.
Allan's weekly rants.
Yeah, and you don't want that.
Yeah, we'll try to keep it interesting, and we'll get feedback from various people the show is good, and we want to keep a certain level of BSDs also, so that it doesn't turn into a specific BSD show. And sometimes there's nothing to report from a BSD project because they're busy working on that, but there's a huge slew of new stuff. But if you have a week where a lot of things are happening and a lot of releases have been happening, we want to give each release the same amount of time roughly to get people the exposure to that new content or the news.
Yeah, it's just... being a FreeBSD person, I know the story behind a bunch of those commits in FreeBSD, and I don't necessarily in OpenBSD. So if there's a really interesting one that you happen to know the story behind, write it up and send it in to us, and we can share it.
Yeah, so then people can listen to it on the way to work or over the weekend. Or try out the stuff that we cover in the show, which is actually our goal, so that people get interested in the projects and the BSDs and see what's new and try out the new releases or whatever is the news of that week.
Yes, so we'll try to do less rote reading and more summaries, but those are hard to write and come up with ahead of time. Yeah, as it was We were about 25 minutes late today trying to finish off the notes for the episode you got. Let alone if we had spent another couple hours trying to better understand and summarize the KSLR articles and so on. But yes,
yeah, well,
you will actually notice that during the Lumina thing, I cut Benedict off from just reading the entire changelog to you.
Yeah, no. It's interesting, but it shouldn't be the weekly reading of the.
Yes, but with the whole changelog, it's how do you pick out which are the interesting changes and which aren't? It's very difficult.
Yeah, other people are interested in other stuff, and you are interested in this one bit of information. But as long as we have the show notes and the links.
I had a whole 5-minute thing on the PDF viewer. I don't know how many other people find that interesting, but for me it was I told the developer what the problems were, and then suddenly they were fixed.
Yeah, but I think people
I'm misusing your program to do this, and it's not very good at it. And it's like, oh, now it is.
Well, people can still skip ahead if there's something that didn't interest them too much, and then pick out the next segment. All right, yeah, thanks for the feedback, and this is the end for this week's episode. Again, if you have something for us, send us questions, comments, blog posts, show ideas to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in the next episode.
Sacrifices to be interviewed, whatever it takes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean volunteers. I meant volunteers. I'm sure I meant volunteers.
Yeah, I hope that came out right. All right, yeah, see you next week, and in your new BSD show each week.